Anyway, the festive season is meant to be a time of joy, but for many it can be a time of stress, anxiety, grief and loneliness. Christmas comes with high expectations of perfect, happy families enjoying luxurious celebrations and gifts, but not all people are able to live up to those ideals. Let's talk about this with clinical psychologist Anele Siswana, who's joining us from Johannesburg. Anele, very good evening to you. Merry Christmas. So how can a period that on paper is supposed to bring such incredible joy bring people so much angst?
I think the difficulty with this time of the year and the season being dark and gloomy as it is, it's predominantly because of the COVID-19, which has came with a lot of factors that contribute to a lot of problems that we have had that have affected significantly our economical life, our way of doing life, and just generally our quality of life has changed due to these drastic and significant change that has happened. So now, ideally, we are not on the same level of economic understanding or on the same level of where we think that probably all middle class, but I always think of those who are below the range of affording the basic fundamental things. So ideally for those people, stress and anxiety would be exactly that, which is a trigger for them today, that ideally they would not even have had the joy and the ability to go to shops and buy for the things that they've always wanted to do. So already they will be experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of loneliness, a lot of sadness. I mean, we call things of family tax. Other people did not go home because they want to. It's just there are circumstances that contribute to that they've lost their jobs, or you don't even have money for yourself. So how do you go home and be able to go to a place that will remind you of your stress and anxiety?
And how do you even begin to resolve that sort of issue? Because you very often, if you're working in the city, let's say if you're working in Johannesburg and you've been sending money home for a year, the duration of the year, or longer than that, there is an expectation that come December, you will go the extra mile, quote unquote. But if you yourself are suffering, often people feel a degree of shame, don't they, at the fact that they're not able to meet the expectations of relatives back home.
Ideally, this is where now we have to help people understand the word boundaries. Because if we then teach our families the language of boundaries and allowing them to understand when you do not have capacity to do something. Yes, I might have been able to do that during the course of the year, but now, and all of these misconceptions that you are making in the city, in Joburg, in Cape Town, in Durban, that suggest that you've got money. In fact, you don't have money because there's so much that you need to be able to afford to play. And at the same time, we need to also help people manage their expectations of what they expect from us. So if I am unable to cope now, I have to make sure that I do that probably 2 months prior, so that my family may know that I do not need to have demands that will remind me of having to do something that I can't. So ideally, I always say to people, let's teach people the word boundaries. Let's teach people our abilities and inabilities to do, and also help you to find a way of managing your expectations of always being able to help others when you are unable to do so. So you need to also manage your own expectations and demands of what you can do for others and what you cannot do.
But there's also then in the conversation that you would have to have with some of your loved ones about boundaries and perhaps even more broadly mental health. People say they struggle with the language, how to frame it, how to explain it to people who may not in their daily discussions be familiar with terminology around depression, anxiety.
I think we also need to find a normative language of normalizing mental health and talking about mental health in a way that at the end of the day, as much as we may be able to see physical health and its manifestations physically, with mental health is an inability where sometimes we are unable to see these manifestations physically. So ideally, we need to communicate to people who are close to us to say, I do not have the capacity of engaging with demands sometimes that we usually term it under black text or family text, to say your requests sometimes they often lead or they leave with an emotional impact that I'm unable to do the things that I'm able to do. At the end of the day, those emotional impacts is that which sometimes lead to guilt, is what leads sometimes to anxiety. Because for me, in simple terms, an anxiety is worrying about worrying. So you've got your own worries, you've got your family worries, you've got worries about COVID-19, you've got worries about vaccines, and a lot of these other worries. So at the end of the day, we need to find local knowledges and local namings of helping people understand what do I mean when I say I do not have emotional capacity? What do I mean when I say I'm anxious? What do I mean when I say I'm stressed? So we need to normalize those languages in our day-to-day engagement so that people can understand what it means for me when I say I often want time to spend time alone in my room. That could be a symptom. What does it mean when I do not have appetite all of a sudden? I do not have energy all of a sudden. I have thoughts about killing myself. I've got thoughts of feeling severely depressed. How do we as a family pay attention to those symptoms that in the end, when we are unable to help this person cope with these demands, we are able to say it's mental health, then we need to find a way of recommending, again, destigmatize all the notions and understandings of when one has survived suicide, what do we do about that? What is the language of how we capacitate people who ideally feel severely depressed and that they're unable to come out of it?
How then do I know, as the person who's battling, if what I'm dealing with is sadness or just something deeper?
Ideally, normal sadness is all that we all experience, triggered by different things. The difference with sadness that is a symptom of clinical depression, it's this kind of sadness that it drains your energy, it drains your ability to function normally. For as long as then, now, can we look at the duration of how long this sadness takes place? What does it come with? Sometimes it comes with low energy, sometimes it comes with low appetite, sometimes it comes with insomnia, and all of these things. And when these symptoms cause what we call clinically a clinical level of significant impairment, that this person is unable to cope, this person is always sleeping, this person is always tearful, then now we're able to say this is no longer normal sadness. This kind of sadness needs one to then actually go to a psychologist that will help them understand what are the psychological factors that contribute to this level of functioning that this person is unable to engage with their day-to-day relationships at home. The situation is somber, relationship-wise, work-wise, there's an inability to do that. And then we are able to say, clinically, this may then warrant one to go to a psychologist. And then in cases where it's really severe, it is then now we've got psychiatric clinics where people are taken for some time. You will be shocked, my brother, to realize at this time there's quite a number of people that are in mental institutions where they are being treated for mental health, for depression, for anxiety, and a number of factors, because this is the time where all of these triggers of sadness and loneliness come in, especially when one does not have a strong psychosocial support to help them navigate this kind of sadness.
You've touched on it slightly, but on psychosocial support, when someone who does have a clinical diagnosis of depression, and the family unit or the friendship unit is wondering how to be there for them, what is the best way to do that? Is it to follow their lead? Because some people will then say to you, please, may I have time alone? I would really just like to be alone at this moment.
I always encourage that there's a very holistic, systemic perspective that involves psychology, that involves medicine where it needed, that involves psychiatrists, that involves healers, people like me who are spiritual healers at the same time, who are psychologists, because we're able then to provide a sense, because we know that there's not only one factor that contributes to one state of mental illness or one state of mental disease. So ideally, what psychosocial support means for me is we bring all of these elements into the picture, because also we are aware that mental health in South Africa is very expensive. So we need to cultivate the culture of self-help, psychotherapeutic tools, of helping people to know these symptoms, what they mean and what they need to do about that. If you've got access to psychologists, we know that when these symptoms impact on the quality of this person, we are then able to say, Anele, we recommend that you see a psychologist. We recommend that you see a counselor. We recommend that you have time to talk. Yes, we get it that you don't want to talk, but that should be done within a very containing space. And sometimes I always say to people, presence and not saying anything and holding that person, providing a holding emotional space is one of the most powerful tools that family members can do, rather than poking and asking a question, what is going on? What is wrong? Why did you try to commit suicide? A lot of people who have emotional instability, who have emotional difficulties, they don't want to be asked what happened, but ideally they want a holding space that even when they do not want to talk, at the back of their minds, they know there's a safe space where I can do that. So for me, at the same time, when we are unavailable as psychologists because we're on leave, even today, it's Christmas, but because I understand this is a call, because I understand this is a service to humanity, I will make time. But when in times when we are unavailable for people, we ideally encourage families to provide a strong psychosocial support for those own individuals who are unable to cope. When it's hard, there are government institutions, there are private institutions where people can be taken for containment and space to find value, and a space where they can heal, most importantly.
Anele Siswana, clinical psychologist, good to speak to you tonight, sir. Speaking to us about the difference between the festive season blues, the pressures that bring the festive season blues on, and when perhaps you may need to seek professional help as far as perhaps a clinical diagnosis if you are indeed depressed or on the spectrum as far as mental health is concerned. I want to bring you some breaking news as far as